Hey guys, it's Bree here at Blossom and Branch Farm, and it has been a very rainy week here. It has been almost an inch of rain for the last 4 days in a row. So right now I have a harvest window to go out and get some peonies because it is peony season. And of course, peonies are one of our top sellers here at the farm. So we're gonna do a little bit of that today. I'm gonna make a few bouquets as well. And then I also wanted briefly to talk about profitability of peonies, because one of the things I see a lot these days is people talking about, growing a lot of peonies or starting peony farms because you can make so much money growing and selling peonies. This season, we're proud to partner with Advancing Eco-Agriculture, providing regenerative solutions for growers, and greencoverseed.com. Do it first things first. I need to go clean out some buckets. So bucket washing is my least favorite job here at the farm, but it's really important that we have clean buckets to harvest into, because if we harvest into dirty buckets, it can actually shorten the vase life of the flowers. All right, so I've got my soap and my sponge. I just use regular dish soap. Some people will use bleach to disinfect their buckets, but I'm not holding them for that long. This is my lovely bucket storage for winter. I like these rectangular containers just because they fit better. If we're putting a lot into the cooler, we can put more rectangular ones and then we can round. Now, one of the great things about peonies is that you can harvest them ahead of time before they're fully open. It's usually actually the best time to harvest them, and store them in a fridge or a cooler. So if we harvest those peonies just before that marshmallow stage, that's when they're gonna last the longest in the cooler. So if we do that, we can get 6, sometimes up to 8 weeks of storage from them if we can keep the temperature right. So to do that, we need to keep our temperatures around 34 degrees Fahrenheit in the cooler. Otherwise, they're not going to keep for that long. So if the temperatures are warmer than 34, 35 in your fridge or in your cooler, they're not going to store for that long. So when you're doing that, you dry store them. So you actually don't store them in water. We have a whole video about it that I'll link down below showing exactly how to do this. That is something that can be helpful when we're talking about profitability of peonies. If you're, thinking about selling some, or even if you wanted to set up like a little roadside stand and sell some of your peonies, it can help to extend your bloom period by harvesting them ahead of time. But one of the other things that can really help is just growing a variety of peonies that bloom at different times. And that's kind of what I do. So we have some very early blooming peonies, we have some mid blooming peonies, some late blooming peonies. They're kind of all over the board in terms of when they bloom. And by doing that, we are able to extend our harvest period. So let's take a look in the cooler, because I have already harvested some, and then we're gonna grab some buckets too. All right, here's our walk-in. Let's see what's going on in here. So right now we're sitting at 36 degrees in here. We have some mock orange I've harvested for a bucket pickup tomorrow. And then we've got some more blooms over here. So you can see this is kind of more open than I would typically harvest at. This would be great for example, a wedding or a gift. So these I'll probably use in the bouquets. Oh, and then we have some more over here, some different tones, some burgundies, canary brilliants. First, I'm gonna do a little sweet pea harvest. So you can see the sweet peas are nice and long. These are the ones we started in the soil blocks back in February. And then we transplant them in usually around mid-March. And so they're just blooming here. A little handful, pop those in the cooler. To grow a lot more sweet peas. I don't grow that many anymore just because there's so much work to deadhead. If you want to learn more about the sweet peas, I've got a whole separate growing tutorial on that here on my channel, so go check that out. All right, let's go see what the peonies are doing. I can see them from here, they're blooming. Okay, so we've got some roses blooming here. It's starting to bloom here. With all this rain, they are quite happy. Peonies, harvest stage. So if I'm gonna give them in a bouquet, I like to do it at this stage. So this is a little bit past what we'd call marshmallow stage. Marshmallow stage is kind of dictated by how squishy they are. So let's look at this one for an example. This one is pretty firm. It's not squishy like a marshmallow. So this one's a little bit too firm to harvest ahead. If I harvested this one, there's a chance it might not open. So let's look at this one instead. A little fuller and a little give when I give it a squeeze. So I wouldn't really harvest probably before this stage. And again, for a bouquet, I like to give them kind of at this stage, because if I hand someone a bunch of these, it's just not that impressive. At least if they're just a little bit fuller like this one, but not started to open yet, this is a better option. So I like to do this, you know, if I'm doing a bouquet for that week, for that day, these ones are my preferred stage. But if I'm going to be trying to keep them in a cooler, then I want them at about this stage or just slightly even before. So it's kind of a balancing act, and you kind of learn. It also depends a little bit on the type of peony, because we have another one, what I'd call like a ruffled one. These guys, which are amazing too and have a great scent. Those ones start out like this. You can see they have a lot of, now if I harvest it at this stage, it doesn't open very well in the vase. So these are one that I don't like to harvest that far in advance. I just know it's kind of this kind of cabbage style. Those ones just, for me anyway, they don't seem to open that well. They don't seem to open that well in the vase if I harvest them too early. So those ones I wait a little bit longer to harvest. I wait until they're about like this. So you can see these ones have just filled out and are starting to open, but this would be too tight. Okay, enough talking. The sun is out. It's getting hot. I have a lot to cut, so let's get going. Now, a lot of people ask me about the side shoots. You know, it's up to you. If you're letting these bloom in your garden, I leave the side shoots. I would just let them stay on there, let them bloom. But for a bouquet, I'll usually pinch off most except for maybe one. These aren't going to open in the vase anyway, but they can be interesting for texture. Now, if you're going to be storing your peonies for a long period, like that dry storage method in the fridge, then you're going to want to take off all the foliage and really any of these side shoots too. So for bucket purposes, what I like to do is kind of harvest all the same stage into one bucket. So for this one, I'm going to harvest all these ones that are kind of bouquet ready into one bucket. All right, I was able to snag some early roses here too. These are Queen of Sweden, which tend to make a nice long stem for a garden rose anyway. And the scent is so good. So I'm going to harvest some of those for my bulk buckets that I have to put out for tomorrow. And then I've harvested my first bucket here, but because we've had so much rain, they are a little bit wet. I don't want to put them in the cooler with dampness on them, so I'm going to leave them out in the shade, not in the sun because they'll open. I'm going to put them in the shade to dry before I pop them into the cooler. Now, if you are cutting for production, I do recommend cutting off those side shoots. So kind of like I mentioned, all these little side ones. If you're just letting these bloom in your landscape, I would just leave them, quite honestly. But if you're cutting for production, cutting these off will help with two things. One, it'll help keep the weight from dropping them down into the ground like this one has, because look how many are on this one. I'm going to cut this for a bouquet, but that weighs them down a little bit. But also it lets the plant direct all the energy into one. So you can see here I've disbudded some of these sides, and then it lets that main bloom be a little bit fuller. But it is time consuming, especially if you have a lot of them like I do. So I don't always do it, if I'm being quite honest with you. When we're harvesting, I also have to be mindful of making sure that I'm only harvesting about a third of the flowers. Because when I'm harvesting for bouquets, I'm cutting down into the plant fairly substantially because we need to get enough length for a bouquet. So if I cut that far down into the plant and I harvest all of the flowers, then it's going to take a lot of the foliage from the peony, and that's going to impact both its ability to resist disease, but also how it's going to bloom in the next year. So only a third is what I'm harvesting for bouquets, and then I'm actually deadheading the rest, which is really painful. But you can use the blooms for things like PEONY SIMPLE SYRUPs. So midway through harvest, we got another rainstorm. It's just been so rainy this whole week. It makes it really hard to harvest because we have to let everything dry out really before we can put it in the cooler. But let's see what we got. Ah! All right, so these are all the ones that we kind of were using to show different colors. I'm going to be using this to make some PEONY SIMPLE SYRUP. Mostly these pink ones make the best simple syrup, and it's a very simple recipe. And then we've got a bunch of coral charms, so you can see how we harvest kind of all the same stage. So these ones are all kind of the same stage. These ones are all the same stage. These ones are all about the same stage. So these are the ones I'm going to be using to make some bouquets here tonight because they're already open. Chamomile harvested. I also have a bunch of willow, and I love using willow as kind of a mock eucalyptus. So it looks like eucalyptus, but it's willow. So that's for our bucket pickup for tomorrow. I still have to go harvest some Baptisia. Oh, I'd say a pretty successful harvest. You know, pricing wise, you know, peonies are kind of all over the board, and a lot of it depends on what time of year it is. So for example, if we were to dry store a lot of these peonies and sell them in, say, end of July when there's not a lot of peonies available, then we can obviously get a much higher price for them per stem. Contrast that with, for example, if we sell them now, we can't get quite as much because there's so many peonies on the market right now. So the ability to dry store peonies in a cooler is very, very helpful. But again, it does require space. You can see how big our cooler is. It's actually an 8 by 10. And even then, it does fill up pretty quickly. So now dry storage does take a little bit less room just because you don't require buckets. We usually just wrap it in the paper. Again, I've got that video below if you want to watch and see how we do dry storage of our peonies. Usually we're looking at a minimum of $4 a stem to $5 and potentially even more for weddings. So if someone, for example, wants a whole bridal bouquet made out of peonies, you know, that can obviously be up into the $300 range easily. So yes, they can be profitable, but I think there are a lot of considerations that you have to make if you're wanting to grow peonies. There really are so many considerations when it comes to determining whether it's going to be profitable for you to grow peonies, and those things mostly involve labor costs. So because peonies mostly bloom in spring and they are a one-time harvest, that means you're going to be hiring seasonal employees. Now, these peonies bloom and you have to harvest them within a couple days of being in the ideal stage. And sometimes if the temperatures are warm, you have to be pretty quick. So making sure you have staff on hand to be able to manage a lot of peonies if you're growing many of them is absolutely key. The other thing you need to consider is storage space, so a cooler. You need a pretty big cooler if you're going to be growing enough peonies to really make money by the time you're hiring employees. So you need to plan for that. And then of course you also have to plan for where you're selling them. Are you selling them retail? That's probably going to require shipping and a lot of time arranging them into bouquets. Or are you selling them wholesale? These are all considerations that you have to make. But again, it comes down to usually labor and also space for cooler storage. All right, let's go ahead and make some bouquets really quickly. All right, so I've got my sheets of craft paper here. I just always buy them like this in basically a rectangle already. Just saves me, I used to buy it in a roll and then cut it, but this just saves me a little bit of extra work. So I've also got my stapler here and my wire. So you could also use rubber bands. Now remember, I have a full flower arranging course on Teachable that goes over different types of bouquets. So hand-tied, how to do a wrapped bouquet, how to do a bridal bouquet, how to do corsages, boutonnieres, all that stuff. But for now, I'm just gonna make a real basic one. So I am gonna kind of mix together the pinks and whites. Here is one. And I'm gonna grab my wire. This is the same wire that I use basically for all of my arranging. It's just very easy to use for things like boutonnieres, all the different flower crafts that I do. This is always the hardest part. So I've got my paper here. I'm gonna lay the neck of my bouquet right on the neck where I folded this paper up. So I do fold it so that it's a little bit of a more narrow rectangle. It just works better for the shape. So you can see this is the original size. I folded it up. I think it's maybe a 18 by 24. And then what I'm gonna do is, so again, here's the neck of my bouquet. And then I fold this up. So see how I fold this here? I'm gonna pinch right at the neck, grab my stapler, and give it one staple right there. And then I go up, and I'm gonna fold this over. So now I've pinched this together. I'm gonna fold this over. And so you can see how that's now framing our flowers nicely and also protecting them. So I've pinched this, folded it up and over. Now I'm gonna grab my stapler. Okay, so there's one. You could do another layer of paper if you wanted to make it fancy. You could also use tissue paper for this, of course. So here's mine, fold it. Now this one I would go the other way. I'll just show one more time. So pinch at the neck, staple, fold, and staple. All right, that's it for me today, guys. I will see you all around here next time at the farm. And if you're looking for the Peony Simple Syrup recipe, I'll put that down below in the description. All right, that's it for me, guys. Let me know what you want to see next time, and we'll see you all around here next time at the farm.